This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And greetings once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of E&P. Quick housekeeping as always. If you are listening to us on whatever podcast platform you like, Deezer, Stitcher, Apple, Google, what have you, please follow us. Watching us on our YouTube channel, there is a subscribe button below me, a bell to the right. If you smash that, you will get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. Francesca Chambers, we are so honored to have you on the program today. Francesca, this is like your first month as the new White House Correspondent for USA Today. Am I correct?
Not even my first month. I think this is my third week, so still pretty new, but so excited to be here.
But you're not unfamiliar with the White House. You've had that beat for a while. I mean, you're just kind of moving into a different platform with a larger audience. This must be very exciting for you.
Yes, I've been covering the White House for, more than 7 years now across a couple administrations. Started under former President Barack Obama's administration, then stuck around for the Trump administration, and now I'm on President Biden. So yes, I've been covering the White House for a while now. The beat itself is not new to me, but I'm really thrilled to be covering it for USA Today, which, as you noted, has enormous reach.
Well, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about being part of the White House press pool, and we're going to talk about you and do all that on the backside right after this.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
Okay, Francesca, just for some logistics, we are recording this before Memorial Day weekend 2022. We're going to broadcast this after Memorial Day weekend, but I have to ask you a question. You just got off Air Force One from Seoul, correct? Did you go with the president?
No, I wasn't on that trip.
Okay, you weren't on that trip. So tell me, how does this all work? How do you decide when you are going to follow a president? Who makes those decisions? How is your life determined as now a White House reporter? How do you decide where you're going and what you're doing?
Well, sometimes the alphabet decides for you. So the way, for instance, that the print pool, which we're part of, works is that it literally goes down alphabetically through news organizations. So your time comes up at your news outlet when your time comes up, and sometimes it's easy to predict, and sometimes it's not easy to predict when your turn comes up. And so you do the best that you can to be available at that time and work around right when you think that your turn will come up. But of course, it's inevitable with any White House. You always have to be prepared. You always have to be ready in case something comes up when you don't expect it to.
I have to ask, I've read so many novels about, journalism and people who have been part of the press do you actually have a go bag ready to go? I mean, are you packed and ready to go if your beeper, excuse me, we don't do beepers anymore. I'm an old man, you're much younger. When your phone goes off, are you ready to rock and roll and just run if you have to?
Especially during the 2016 election, I actually did, because back then I was a campaign embed who followed Hillary Clinton around, and then Bernie Sanders, and then Hillary Clinton again during that election. And so, yes, I was almost constantly packed and ready to go. And when I would get home, I would unpack and then repack right away just in case something happened and I had to leave home a little bit earlier than I expected. Of course, during the pandemic, that wasn't as much the case. That really shook up the way that we covered campaigns. But you remind me right now, I need to repack my bag just in case. was curious.
All right, so let's talk about you first, and I want to talk about covering the White House. What was your your path to journalism? How did you find your way to get into this industry? And just what was, did you have a passion? Was it a calling, or is it something you obliquely just tripped over in college? Was it one mentor? How'd you get involved in all this?
Well, when I was younger, I was always interested in this. I was actually one of those kids who had a newsletter, right, in my Microsoft Word, and I would write up the things around my house and the neighborhood sort of thing. So really, back when I was a child, this was something that I was interested in. And then when I got into high school and middle school, I had really great teachers who encouraged me to pursue this also. And then in high school, I actually was one of the co-editors of my high school newspaper and went to journalism school at the William Allen White School of Journalism at the University of Kansas. So this is, been something I've long been passionate about, and I've been so thrilled to get to do it at great news organizations in Washington, D.C., including now USA Today.
Did you ever have a passion to want to go into broadcast? You have the look for it. I hope you don't mind the compliment. Or did you prefer to be someone who has to write the entire story and follow it? I mean, not that the people in broadcast aren't journalists. I'm simply saying some go in front of the camera, stand there with the mic and enter the story. Others are writing it up. Was the path always in your mind to be part of a platform or a paper? Or would you have gone in any direction where the opportunity was?
I actually majored in print journalism. And
really?
So it's funny you mentioned that. I do a lot of TV now on behalf of USA Today and have done that in the past in my White House reporting jobs. But when I was in college, no, it wasn't really where I thought it was going to go in my career. It's something that kind of naturally just happened to be able to promote my work on air and be able to do that as part of my print journalism job. But it's so funny you mentioned that, because I thought a lot about that over the last couple of years about how it was never my intention in college. In fact, I didn't really want to even take the broadcast journalism courses because I was so into print reporting. Who would have thought?
Okay, so was there a mentor? Was there someone you followed, whether that you knew them personally or just read their works over the years? Who was there a mentor or someone that you just looked up to in the industry? I'm curious.
Oh gosh, there's too many people to name who I look up to in the industry. I'm going to name a few people, but it's not limited to this specific list.
Okay.
So one of them being Susan Page, who I'm so excited and thrilled to get to work with now here at USA Today. She's long been someone who I've looked up to. She's an author. She's an award-winning journalist. She's someone who hosted the Gridiron Club in Washington. She is someone who was also president of the White House Correspondents Association. So someone I've long looked up to. But I've had a number of other folks. I'm going to give a shout out to one other person from who currently works at McClatchy, Colleen McCain Nelson, who actually is also from Kansas too, like me, and so is Susan Page. And so it's been really great to be able to be in Washington, D.C. and connect with fellow Kansans who've covered the White House and do what I do.
You did go to don't think I stalked you or anything, but I did look at your background. Hope you don't mind. You were a graduate of the William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Kansas. Your path shot up pretty quickly. I mean, you came out. What was the first gig you did? Were you was the Examiner? Am I correct? You got a job as an intern there, or did you just immediately start off at the Washington Examiner?
Well, I started off in web editing, actually, back in the day, right, when there were folks like myself who put the articles online, which now I think most of us, right, we put our own articles in the content management systems online. But back in the day, that was not the case. And
no,
so
you just right. I remember those days.
That was a really great opportunity to be able to do that. Anything you can to get your foot in the door, as they say, right? As a recent college grad, to be able to get in the journalism industry. And then I really had the fortune that when the Daily Mail was approaching me, they were looking for, people to help launch their politics in Washington, D.C. coverage. And so I joined their team, and that was a phenomenal opportunity because as we talk about the White House beat, it's so hard as a young person when you want to cover the White House, but how do you get to covering the White House? And so when they said that they're just launching in the US and I could cover whatever I wanted on politics, right? I saw that as a really great pathway to be able to cover the White House and cover politics. And I had mentioned before that I did end up covering Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders, but I also covered a lot of the different Republicans who were running back at that time too. Lindsey Graham was running that year. Scott Walker. There was a number of folks who have continued to be prominent in politics, and so then as I was mentioning, I moved to McClatchy, where I covered President Trump, and I also back then, I was covering Vice President Kamala Harris, Cory Booker. So, a number of these people who are in the Senate currently, who, again, went on to be big national political figures. And then now, as we noted, I'm at USA Today, where I'm still covering campaigns, I'm covering elections, I'm covering any breaking news at the White House, which, by the way, I'm hoping that there's none breaking while we're doing this, because I'm always worried, right, that there's breaking news at the White House. But really excited to continue to get to do that here.
I monitor just about every news network on my phone, and when nothing's blipping right now, you're okay.
This is good. I'm trusting you.
I went to college at GW. I actually lived for a while, 21st and F. So I actually lived close to the White House, and I'm always like a history nerd. Whenever, even back then and even today, whenever I look at the White House or I come back to DC, I get a passion for history. Do you ever stop and breathe in where you are and the past of all that? Maybe my head's into that, because the person I interviewed just before you on this platform was a college professor named John Marshall, who wrote a book called Clash. I don't know if you're familiar with it, which went over the history of the White House press corps and over the last 200 years and all the different ways it interacted. Have you ever stopped and just looked at where you are and said, hey, Helen Thomas was here, other poets? I mean, does that sometimes impact you where you are today?
Oh my gosh, every time. Every time I walk into the White House, I think about how fortunate I am to be able to cover the White House. As I was saying before, it took a while to get there. And it's such an honor. It's such an honor for me to be able to do that, and to have been able to do it for so long, covering this beat too. That's not lost on me, and absolutely. But to your point, sometimes I do think, gosh, I should take more photos. I should take more photos as we're documenting history, right? I should be keeping more of a journal, right? To write down all these amazing things that are happening so that I can tell future generations about them. Because that's another big passion for me is working with journalism students and training the next generation of journalists.
Do you work with journalism students? Do you mentor them?
I do. I currently chair the scholarship committee on the White House Correspondents Association. I think we now call it the Public Mission Committee, but we have called it the Scholarship Committee in the past. And so I've gotten to work with a lot of great scholars that way. And I speak to journalism groups. Again, I definitely want, the next incoming generation of journalists to also be inspired and be passionate about covering the White House, if that's what they want to do.
You do know that I've been in this industry now for a few decades, that the industry is desperately trying to become more DEI. We're really trying to have more diversity, equity, and inclusion. You obviously are working for a mainstream media, that's an overused term. You're working for an established media company as someone of color, as a woman, is there any advice you would give to a young journalist that says, I want to stay away from that? I just don't feel like I'm inclusive. How did you find your path? And do you have advice for the youth of today that want to enter this industry? Is there a career? Should people be looking to enter and help the mainstream media? Do you know what I mean by that? I mean, the USA Todays, the McClatchys, the Gannett's, the established media, in order to grow and prosper for generations to come?
I am very passionate about covering the White House and covering politics. And for any other young journalist or aspiring young journalist who wants to do that, then I say go for it if that's what you want to do in life. And again, I'm here. If there's anyone watching, they should definitely reach out. If you're an aspiring young journalist, I try as much as I can to respond to those sorts of emails. That would be one piece of advice that I do have, is don't be afraid to reach out to journalists who you would like to have as a mentor, who you respect. I will respond to you as quickly as I can. Sometimes it takes me, I'm sorry, a little bit of time, but I do try to respond to those. And I think that's another piece of advice, just generally as a journalist. If you want an interview with any sort of politician or you want to cover an issue, to absolutely go for it, because I'm very much a you miss 100% of the shots that you don't take sort of person. And
Wow.
I've been so surprised in my career by times when I thought, surely this person, isn't going to respond to me, right? This politician or this organization, and then they do, right? And you have to take those emails, you have to make those calls, or I guess now, right, send those direct messages on Twitter or however you're reaching out to people. If you want to get in touch with them, you never know, they could respond.
You remind me, I'm going to get a little personal. My 19-year-old daughter wants to enter the music industry, not just be an artist. And she'll be starting in a couple of months at a actual recording studio in Nashville, run by someone who, had records and hits and all that. And his advice to her was, you say yes to everything. Do you feel if you were a young journalist, it doesn't matter whether, because you started at a right-wing news outlet, the Examiner in a way, then you helped them launch a new product, or you went off to a platform that they merged with, but it wasn't whether they were right or left. You were just looking to get the gig, right? You say yes and you move forward and you answer those emails and you move and you jibe and you take the gig. Is that what you're saying?
It can be pretty hard coming out of something like the 2008 financial crisis, which is when I was graduating from college. And we all know what a time that was for the journalism industry. And I think in some ways, when you look at the pandemic for young people who are graduating right now, it can be hard, to get that first job sometimes, particularly if you want to work in Washington, D.C., if you want to work in covering politics, right? Which, if you want to do that, you can also do that, of course, in your state and in your town. And for young people who are passionate about that, that's also really great too. But if you want to move to Washington, D.C., that can be very difficult. But that's part of what I'm saying about you can still reach out to people. You can still do those interviews. You can apply to places like USA Today or Gannett's Amazing Network, right? We have so many different papers, and that's also a really great pathway to get to Washington, D.C. Or you could move here and you could do an internship at one of those places. There's just so many different pathways now, I think, for young journalists to be able to get to where I am.
You have quite a following on Twitter. You have 20, just shy of 30,000 followers now.
I was going to say, I think you're giving me more than I think I actually have.
That's what I saw, at least on the profile I looked at. I got to ask you some questions. You were retweeting some people, some that looked like you may have worked with in the past. I saw you retweeted someone that was at the Examiner, and you retweeted someone from McClatchy recently. Is there a social media policy or conduct that you have to follow at USA Today? Do you have a social media boss, or do you have freedom on what you post on your social media channel? I hope you don't mind me asking, and you can say no comment, but I'm just curious, how does it work when you achieve the stature you have with all the following you have right now?
I'm not sure that I'm following any sort of a strategy here in terms of anything other than if someone's tweeted another White House correspondent or, a colleague that's tweeted something that's an article that's newsworthy, other than to share that if they've broken something or they're maybe doing something in the White House press briefing. I think recently, for instance, I had asked a question and someone else was actually tweeting and giving me credit for that sort of thing, the question that I asked in the briefing, and just uplifting that.
But there's no social media police that you have to deal with in your position as you represent another media company, or are you free? I'm just curious. Is there a contract you sign that says you must be a certain way on social media, if I may?
Yeah, and I'm just here to cover the White House, like I said, and to also uplift other White House correspondents as well online. And as you noted, sometimes my past colleagues, my current colleagues on my social media accounts.
All right. So what are your thoughts about the clickiness of the White House Correspondents? Did you go to the dinner? Were you at the White House Correspondents dinner? Yes, no?
Yes, I'm actually on the White House Correspondents Association board. So not only was I at the dinner, I had the really great honor of being on stage at the dinner also.
All right. So it's a philanthropic event. We know that. And it has history, and it's something that everyone wants to see what was said and all that. Do you feel that the press and the White House are getting a little cliquey? Or, some people say this is not the way it should be. You should always be adversarial with the people you cover, and there shouldn't be this one time where you're all making jokes with each other. What is your opinion of all that? Yeah, left versus right, the good versus bad, media was the enemy, is the enemy, isn't the enemy. How do you feel about the way I guess, the ecosystem of the White House correspondents and the people you cover. Is it working, and is it a good relationship? Is this, or is it becoming more difficult to maintain? I hope that's a fair question to ask you.
This is also a really important time for me to note that while I am a member of the WHA board, I don't speak on behalf of the WHA.
Okay, sure.
That only the WHA president speaks on behalf of the WHA. That's a really long-standing policy, and I can just talk about my work. And
Right.
and to that point, I'm only talking about my coverage of the White House, my coverage of the presidents, the current and the past presidents. But I will say that I'm also very passionate about pressing for press freedoms and press accessibility, and also holding government officials accountable, whether that be the president or any other government official at the local or national level.
All right. So, well, you have a passion then for what the purpose of the press at the White House is, which is that final check on power, Madisonian democracy, and all that and more. How do you feel about the relationship between the press and the spokespeople? Is there still a flak jackets? I have to know this. Is in the office of the press secretary, is this tradition still going on as well? What is it like in there?
I haven't actually, I'll be honest with you, I haven't actually asked Corrine if Jen left her note in the jacket. You're talking about the jacket where former press secretaries have left notes. I haven't had a chance to ask her about that. The president was about to head on his trip to Asia, and we had Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor, in the press briefing room to ask him questions about that and other foreign policy issues. So I'm sorry, I don't have the answer to that one. I haven't had a chance to ask. Maybe someone else will.
Okay, cool. What's your working day like? Do you go to every gaggle? Do you have other staff that can cover it for you? When I was in college, sometimes if I was busy, I would share notes with another student. If I knew that the professor might just be going over some stuff. How do you work your sources? Just give me a typical day in your life, if you don't mind me asking. When do you rise and what are you doing? And I know it changes hourly. Suddenly you can get a call and you're off going somewhere. But let's assume it's a typical day. There's going to be a daily briefing in that day. How do you manage it? What is your day like?
Oh gosh, I'm sorry, but there is no typical day. Even if you try to, even that's what I was saying before about breaking news, even if you try to plan it right, by midway during the day, that can be shifted because maybe the press briefing changes, the president adds an event to his schedule. So you have to be really flexible, right? And by the way, sources understand that, folks understand that you have to move things because you're covering the president and the White House. People are very understanding about that. But it's so great to be on a team like I am at USA Today, where we have 5 White House correspondents who are covering things, so that, for instance, right now while I'm talking to you, if there really is breaking news and something happens, there's a wonderful team who can also handle that. So I would say, in terms of, you're talking about note sharing, we're always talking, we're always sharing notes, but of course within the White House press corps too, great group of people, tons of folks I can rely on. For instance, if the president says something you can't quite hear what he said, maybe he's on the other side of the room, what did he say? And that's what the press pool is really for also, is to be able to send those pool reports, which you guys should all be able to see, I believe, publicly, what the pool reports are looking like. So we're, that's part of the reason that exists, is to be able to share those things with one another, because I don't know how many people know this, for instance, about the Oval Office and about the size and things like that. Not every journalist, going back to what you were saying about the press pool, can be in there all of the time, right? So one person from print outlets, for instance, can be in there at any one time, and then they're sending out those pool reports to everyone else, and news outlets cycle through that, and it's different, if you're in print versus TV versus radio, et cetera, how those cycles look like. So in a way, we're always constantly relying on folks. Right now, we're relying on the folks who are, on Air Force One, for instance, with the president, to relay back to us anything that might say or might happen. So
do you sometimes have a question you just desperately want to get through, and do you have to go through the press secretary and say, I really want to make sure I get this question out? And do you get a chance to try to buy or beg or whatever it takes to get that moment where you can stand up in the press pool and ask that question? Is that something you pre-negotiate, or do you just show up and hope that your hand will be recognized and you can pose your question?
But there's a number of ways that we get information when you cover the White House. The White House has the daily press briefings. Sometimes,
Sure.
for instance, the president has news conferences when he departs. Sometimes he'll take questions out there, out on the South Lawn at his events. Sometimes the president, right, will take questions from journalists also where they're shouted or if he calls on people. And of course, there's background briefing calls that they have on issues. If we ask for interviews with policy experts, so there's just any number of ways in which we're able to interact with the White House and get information depending on what story that you're working on at any given time.
All right, so I've asked a lot of questions about the White House, and who doesn't? I mean, come on, you are sitting there in the seat of power of the free world, if not the entire world. So that's got a lot of energy. Let's now just circle back to your political coverage. I mean, your history in politics, and our audience, as you likely know, is thousands of local news publishers. We define a news publisher as even someone who just runs an online news environment to, of course, an established newspaper of whatever size, whatever circulation, weekly, daily. We got an election cycle coming up. Some of these are going to want to actually start covering candidates and embed people into political campaigns, big or small, statewide, local. There are going to be people who have their eyes on higher office. What advice would you give a publisher now on investing the resources and finding the talent necessary to cover political campaigns that are about to really start boiling as we get into the midterms and beyond? Do you have any advice for those local publishers?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm the right person to be giving advice to any publishers as a reporter. But what I can say is that, we were talking before about the 2016 election versus the 2020 election, or even, 2022, 2024, and what that could look like, right, coming out of the pandemic. So I will be curious myself to see what that looks like. As we move out of the pandemic, because 2020 was a different election because of coronavirus, right? We saw that folks weren't doing as many in-person events; they were doing virtual events, and so we had to cover things. All of us as journalists, right? The industry had to shift to cover things a little bit differently, and so I'm not even sure. As I'm sure most of you are saying, most of those folks aren't even sure yet, what that's going to look like as we move forward. Even though it does seem like we're getting back to more of an in-person coverage style.
All right, let's assume that a publisher has told a reporter that you're now going to follow a political campaign. I'm assigning it to you. What advice would you give that young, inexperienced reporter that's about to move just from covering a city beat or normal stories where you spend time just, digging to covering the give and take of a political campaign? Any just top of mind advice you would offer to that reporter?
Well, in addition, like I said, to not being afraid to reach out to people, right? The people that you want to talk to. Also, don't be afraid to ask the questions that you want to know the answer to be very direct with them, to get the story that you're looking for, or the questions that you want to ask. Don't hold back, I guess is what I'm saying. Whether that's again reaching out to people, but also making a broad breadth of sources. If you know that that's your candidate, right, and you're assigned to a very specific candidate, make as many possible sources that you can. But also, you want to make sources not with that candidate, right, with other candidates, with other folks. Also, you never know. For instance, if you're in a competitive, let's say, presidential primary situation, when your candidate might drop out and you might be put on a different candidate, right? You don't want to jump in and have no sourcing ready to go, but you also want to have a wide variety of sources so that you can include other voices, right, besides someone's campaign. So there's also just a lot of different ways that you can go about doing that, and you have to find the style that best suits you.
There you go. This has been a great interview. Moreover, the final question, it's right here. Where do you see yourself in 10 years? Where do you, do you have goals beyond this? Or are you just taking every day as it comes? Now that you've achieved, you're pretty young. At least if you look so. I haven't stalked your age or anything, but you've achieved a lot in a very short a period of time. And you're working, I'm sure, side by side with some people with many decades of experience that are near you, and I'm coaching and counseling you as well. Where would you want to be in 10 or 15 years in your life?
It's funny, again, as we talk back about like my younger self versus my current self. And before I thought I had it all planned out. But as we were talking about, right, financial crises and pandemics, you can never actually plan, I think, necessarily 10 years out to know what you're going to be doing. So now it's more about being open to possibilities, right? And this was a great possibility that I was very open to. I met USA Today, but also joining you and your viewers today also was one of those two. And it's just been a great opportunity. And I'm so excited now that I've finally hit the ground running here to see what it has in store for me at USA Today.
We're very excited. We're going to keep an eye on, of course, we're keeping an eye on what's happening, but more importantly, we're going to follow you and see how it goes, because USA Today has such a huge audience and you're joining such a great team there. Francesca Chambers, the new White House correspondent for USA Today, not new at covering politics in the White House, but new at working for this huge news media environment. We thank you for your valuable time. We thank you for your insights. You stay healthy and well, and of course, we'll be keeping an eye on seeing all the great things that you report on.
Thank you so much. This has been great.